Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Temko and this is Worshippers. Developed by Brainwashing Games, it is their second title on Steam as far as I can tell, and it is their first foray in a combination of Forex and card collection slash deck building. So going into this weird combination, do they do it any good? Well, the game is coming to Steam Early Access, so things are subject to change, but the game is commercially available, so critique it we shall. As always, before we dive into the gameplay proper, I would like to take you with me to the options menu and talk about PC performance and PC settings. Now, PC performance wise, the game runs absolutely fine. This is, for an early access build especially, a very solid and stable build. I have not had any crashes, any bugs, any issues, any performance dips or drops overall. It runs as stable as it should in any situation, in any way, and that is commendable, especially in early access. But that doesn't mean it's perfect. Especially in the options end, it really does fall flat. With only master music and sound volume sliders and one separate one for animation speed, which you'll never use, the game lacks anything from resolution options to VSync options inside of the title. Now, there is a pre-launch window where you can change some of those things, but that is very little and obviously outside of the game, which never really sits well with me personally. I just like having those options in the game proper where I am already experiencing the game and want to tweak some things without shutting down the entire damn title. That said, the game also doesn't have any graphical options, which is where I feel the game could have used a little bit more here and there. Now, the game's art style is pretty stylistic and artistic as far as those things go, but there's still a couple of things I would have liked to see, such as AA or shadow options and the like, which the game really doesn't offer and I would have liked to see. But visually, it doesn't really suffer from the lack of video options because of its stylistic sort of nature and kind. And I'll dive into gameplay and tell you all about that as we go forward. But before we dive into gameplay proper, we do have to take a look at the deck building and card exploration things the game offers. Now, as you go through the game, you'll unlock a variety of cards. They can be summed up in units, buildings, items, or spells, and each of them is used during the game in one of three tiers. Tier 1 is your basic starting tier you'll use for most of the initial missions. Tier 2 is once you unlock the meeting hall in your game, then you have the access to these cards with higher cost and higher abilities, and then you have Tier 3, which is what you unlock after you build the Chief's Hut. Generally speaking, you will not get to Tier 3, especially not in the first couple of missions. The first missions are really limited to Tier 1, not because the game forces you to stay at that limit, but because there are really no chances for you to expand beyond that. And that is, I think, the biggest flaw of the title going into gameplay, but I'll get into that in a second. The biggest thing here is that you can customize these cards as you deem fit. So you can remove a card and add a card as you deem fit. Overall, pretty straightforward. Now, brown cards are required, so you can't remove the meeting hall or the settler, and everything else you can change to your heart's content. But you can also unlock new cards. Well, you unlock new cards through two methods, either completing missions and getting cards as a reward, or by unlocking cards once you get worshippers. Now, each of these missions that you see in the background here as stars is going to give you worshippers. Reward 20 worshippers, 15 worshippers. Using these worshippers, you unlock new cards in this tree of cards. Pretty straightforward, and each of these cards does something specific. Now, some of these cards can, for the duration of that mission, also be bought in the game using the in-game resource gold. So you do have a little bit of flexibility of what you can expect and experience in the title. But overall, you'll be doing missions, getting worshippers, unlocking cards, building a stronger deck, and then doing harder missions. And yet the game offers you the chance to dive into a maximum difficulty mission from the get-go, which is a little bit annoying because that creates the expectation that you could theoretically complete those missions with just the base card set. And that, after multiple tries, is flat out impossible, given the constraints the game forces upon you during this time. But we'll talk all about that as we dive into gameplay proper, so let's go ahead and do exactly that. Now, going into the gameplay proper, let me first explain how the game's basic content works. You start with a settler, much like Civilizations, where you can create a village, and this then in turn allows you to create new buildings such as farms and tool shops and the like that gives you some of the resources you need to recruit new armies and new buildings and cast new abilities and spells. All that together generates the four resources in the top left: food, tools, gold, and worship. And you get a certain number of actions you can do each turn. So that is the gray little icon bars just below the resources in the top left. Top of that, with every mission, you get specific objectives you need to do to get more victory points. I'll get into that in a second. Those can be seen on the left. And in the bottom, obviously, you have your cards that you've drawn from your deck. Now, this is, I think, the interesting bit of the game. Every turn, you get a choice when you select a village. For each village, you can create a new card. So every time you right-click on the village during a turn, you'll have the option of drawing a new card or generating resources based on a sort of pseudo-randomized experience if you want to use a specific card for resources. You can also sacrifice cards in your hand to then get some resources based on what you might want to do with them. It creates a little bit of flexibility where you might have additional cards in your hand that you don't plan on using, and you can sacrifice those for resources, which you can then use to get more army or to get more items and the like on the field. But this turn limit and these activity limits are really the core about what you'll be managing, because resources, while limited, are most often not going to be the deciding factor in whether or not you can do a certain activity. That is going to come down to your turn cycle, how many actions you can do in a turn, because everything you do costs an action. Getting a new card costs an action. Getting resources costs an action. Moving your army on the grid costs one or more actions depending on the terrain they're going through. And all of this obviously means you have to be very careful in what you do and how many things you want to accumulate during a match or during a mission. And this creates a little bit of an annoying issue with the title. Overall, the entire thing with creating villages and getting new settlers and expanding them with new villages again and getting resource production going and building armies and then fighting enemies, all of that works pretty much as you'd expect it in any Civilizations title, except obviously a lot smaller scaled and a lot more intimate with a lot shorter missions and objectives. Civilizations tends to drag on. This is something you'll probably do in about 10 to 15 minutes per mission, on at least the lower end missions. But the problem is because you have so few actions you can take during a turn, all you do is rush after with a laser pointed accuracy the objectives you need to complete, because you need to gather those victory points. Now the victory points can be found in the top left. Right now for this mission I need 16, and you get them by either building new buildings, killing enemy armies in the field, or by completing the objectives you have on the left side. And depending on the combination of these things, you are very strictly running after the completion of those objectives. You have very little freedom to explore, just dally around, to experiment with things. None of that is in essence possible, because all you'll be doing is chasing after those objectives. For example, if I wanted to get the food objective, I was forced to just focus on just getting that food going. I wasn't going to be buying any units. I wasn't going to be just waiting around for that to come up, because after a certain number of turns, that objective fails. If I then want to defend my holdings and settlements against enemies, I better build up a really strong army really fast. That means I'll not be spending resources on buildings, I'll not be spending resources on things like new villages, or on expanding, or on upgrading my units, or anything like that. No, I'll be spending it on food, maybe some tools, just to make sure I have an army big enough to defend my settlement from the oncoming cursed ones attacked. And the same goes for exploration. Going out to find a cave or a village of NPCs where you can trade with. You might send out a scout or two, but you'll be using them very minimally. And again, because it is so laser focused and you want to achieve these objectives and you have a limited number of actions to do it in, so you better plan ahead. In many regards, it basically becomes a puzzle game in some ways, in the way you just have to plan ahead all your actions turns in advance, because you have 4 actions now. If I get 3 resources now, I can use those resources to build this archer unit. That gets me so many army points. Combining that with this other building I have planned, I can get 1 more victory point. Everything is based around that idea. And I feel for a game that tries to combine deck building and 4X, that is very much not the right approach. Everything is very stripped down in terms of scope. Even the map, as you can see, is very small. You can get the exploration of the entire map done in a couple of turns, and everything after that really is limited. And that is a damn shame, because this game sets the stage for something that could be tremendously large and then limits it to very tiny. Right now I have a village with 1 building. I'll build a second village and maybe a couple of farms, but that's where I'll end up. I'm not going to expand and cultivate entire forests. I'm not going to be looking at building massive armies. I'll be moving around the map continually, like I would do in Civilizations or another title like that. All I'll be doing here is moving 1 army around, and maybe I'll make a couple of extra units with that. And that, again, just feels like you have to be so focused on that laser guided precision of this is my objective, this is what I need to achieve to get those victory points. Otherwise, I'll fail the mission and then I might as well start over again. which really ruined some of the gameplay experience for me personally. A lot of the enjoyment I've had from this title has been when I just messed around, when I built a couple of armies, when I moved units around left and right, when I engaged with enemies in their towns or hideouts or caves or attacked enemies wherever they might be. And that, well, happens way too little during the gameplay of this title. That is definitely a bit of a shame. That said, the gameplay overall isn't bad. It's just so laser focused that I feel allowing the player more freedom would be much better. In general, you start your turn, you gather your cards, you build your buildings, you get your resources, and based on that, well, you get victory points. By upgrading your buildings, you get a new victory point. By defeating an enemy in war, you get a victory point. So all you're doing is working toward those victory points. And in my opinion, it would be nicer if the game allowed you multiple victory methods. Right now, there is usually only one you can reasonably accomplish within a match. There's no way for me to complete this mission I'm doing right now, just building buildings and building villages and focusing on commerce or anything like that. That isn't even in the game in any traditional way. Commerce exists out of going to a village with your army and using your gold resource to buy a card or two. So from a scope perspective, this game is very much stripped down from a 4X type of game. From a gameplay perspective though, it still tries to accomplish that and yet doesn't allow you the freedom to then find out where the game really finds its edges. And I feel that is the biggest flaw of the title. All in all, it is very enjoyable to go in on a mission and figure out a way to get the necessary victory points. But that way it is more of a puzzle game and not a 4X experience. The same goes for the deck building. You can focus around your deck building and think up a myriad of ways on how you plan on completing your objective and trying to figure out the best way for your playstyle to get armies or get units. But even there's really only one optimal way of doing things and execute as best you can. Having spoken about the gameplay enough, the game is, in my opinion, thus a mixed bag. Speaking about the art style and all the other things about the game, there is a lot of good here. I personally really enjoyed the art style of the title. All just fits together extremely well, and depending on the characters and the different upgrades and the different units as they level up, they get different styles. As you progress, even the animations, though limited, all feel fantastic. It all just feels like somebody made it with a painting, brought to life, and not just the backdrops and the overall map, but even the characters and animations and everything just fits so well together in that art style that it is truly enjoyable to behold. Now, from an animation perspective, obviously it is not high fidelity, and the indie roots of the title definitely come through quite heavily. There is some minor issues I have with some of the ways it displays health and armor and the way it displays alerts and experience gain that doesn't always look and appear as nice compared to the art style in the game. I would have liked them to spend some more time on incorporating this difference between the text on screen and the way the game flows and feels in terms of visual fidelity. But from a pure art style perspective, this game has a unique approach that is not confusing because you never look at something and wonder, is that a wolf or is that a bear or is that something in between? And even on the overworld, when you're looking at a forest or a swamp or a field, everything feels and looks extremely nice. And that is, I think, a very good thing. Audio-wise, nothing really particular or specific that is really good. The audio fits the purpose. On occasion, it has this nice chiming extra, and background audio is unremarkable to say the least. It's not bad in any real way, but neither does it stand out like something like Doom, where the audio track might as well be a product in and of itself. Here, sure, they have sounds, but that's really all you can call them. Overall, combined, Worshippers does create a nice little niche between deck gathering and deck building and fine-tuned 4X experience, but I feel it doesn't go far enough in the direction of that 4X to be truly a deep or engaging title. With the limited depth and limited freedom you have during a mission to explore, to expand, and to sort of do your own thing, the game has a tough hurdle ahead of it in my eyes. Worshippers does do a couple of things really well. The combination of deck building and pseudo 4X experience is really enjoyable, and the exploration and expansion during a match is interesting and good, but I feel the game doesn't go far enough in the 4X experience to provide enough freedom and choice to the player. And with the way the game guides and forces you to into that path with laser precision, that often sort of feels like it misses the mark. Overall, a very solid early access title, Worshippers does still have a lot of work left to it in terms of depth and gameplay complexity, especially in terms of its combat, which I've not spoken about because it mostly consists out of clicking attack and waiting whoever else is left on the field with very little tactical depth in my eyes. I would like to see expand that as well to create again more depth, more feature rich and more content-rich gameplay, where you will have more options to choose from to complete a mission and more ways to do so outside of the 1 or maximum 2 ways you might be able to do so right now in the current method. And most important of all, no bugs or issues. And for that alone, they deserve extraordinary amounts of praise. Worshippers is coming over on Steam on November 11th, and you can check it out with the link in the description down below if you are so inclined. If you like this video, press that like button down below. If you didn't like this video, well, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose. And if you want to support us going forward, I want to see more content like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. So until then, I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.